76 to 85 and see what is it, about the ANC and the PAC that we completely misunderstood. Because if we understood what they are and what they were, particularly the ANC wouldn't have had the kind of popularity that it enjoyed in the 1980s. Yeah.
Yeah, hey, typical Lukoluma after I'm a hot man.
Trying to complete my PhD as you were teaching me roots in
In a unit, I couldn't find a course supervisor. Yeah, actually, I'm a cheater and yeah, I applied for a PhD in 2018. I got.
You know, as they came, man, they had to pretend. That's why I think just send one guy to shoot so that they can see that you are fighting. Oh, the donors.
And I'll declare myself from last week. I'm in sympathy with your position. In fact, there was no war in the first place. But I think consistent with it, we should then see saying nobody gave in to anything. It was all controlled by them in the first place. What happened in CODESA was a staff meeting.
Robe is one of these people. He actually becomes involved in the UDF. Terem Siwelikota is actually one of the Eric. Eric Nulovi is one of them. In fact, there's a new biography.
Because it helps us.
And then there's a biography out on Eric Mulobi, and it actually shows the transition. That Frank Chigani is one of these people. These are people who made that shift. Away from...
How did they say? They matured.
They matured. And this is their... This is a period where black was absent even when they were present, and white was present even when they were absent. So what you see as black agency is precisely that. Let's be frank about it. In Exile, I often say, Tambo was absent even when he was present. And Joslovo was present even when he was absent.
And as a baby, for eternity.
Cool.
I never grow. The lower to no or not never happens. So
Oh, I see. So who's to kick it off? I'm on.
I can all direct.
No, it's that introduction. So you can introduce yourself and then we introduce themselves. And there we go. We are up.
So I'm assuming you are the one asking or laying that.
Who's asking questions?
Yes. I said you.
Yes. So you now start directing us around the conversation. So Swati,
This is a sudden and drastic.
Fortunately, Ako said you're going to introduce yourself. You give them opportunity to introduce themselves, and then Yasoka. So the viewers know who's talking, and then leave background, a bit of background.
I thought he's a contributor.
Yes. No, he's not a contributor. He's a co-host. Let's go.
Very cool. You compare surprise.
Okay. The name is Molora Mabeba, a resident of Diepkloof. I function here as a mathematics tutor. I'm in the mathematics field. My association with this panel comes through my association with my brother Brastifie, who I met in 1985. This is 2025. This would have been 40 years ago, when we both were students at WITS University. We're just entering in the tumultuous atmosphere at WITS. I had a very rather unusual upbringing for back those days. One of the few people who, as a response to the 1976 upheavals, the fact that there were no high schools in townships, couldn't go to high school here. So my parents, through their connections in Botswana, posted me over to Botswana. So here I was from the township into Botswana, into a Model C situation. And for 6 years there I was lost in the wilderness, attempting to find myself. It was a prelude, though, to the new South Africa, as you can well imagine. I come back here in 84, and in 85 I ran into Brastif. See, really at this. So I'm a child of the 1970s. My elders were in the townships pushing the black consciousness movement. When I went to Botswana, I ran into them. They've already baskipile, they've gone into exile. They are part of the exile contingent. So my black consciousness upbringing continues. So I'm thrust back into the country in the early 80s, and it is the other faction, the ANC, that is in the upsurge. And all this upheaval is going on in the township. I'm at a loss. I'm attempting to understand it for myself. No, as luck would have it, as fortune would have it, Steve comes into the picture, who connects me not only to the traditional struggle which I grew up in, you see what I'm saying, in the family, in the township, but also manages me, helps me to make sense of what it is that is unfolding in front of me. My debt to the brother is how shall I say, valueless. You know what I'm saying? I can't, it couldn't be quantified. I'm a specialist in mathematics, but because of my associations with him, I got interested in the humanities as well. Do you see what I'm saying? So even as I had an aptitude for math, I developed myself philosophically and got interested in history so as to be able to engage in debates and interactions with my elder here. So a profound effect. It gives you a sense of who I am. Much of what I am could be distilled within this man's inputs. You see, I'm sorry to say. So,
Yeah, now, I was actually expecting a very brief, kind of introduction. Now, Molora has actually, put me in a spot here. Well, I do have a kind of background, just in terms of, political involvement. Without going into the details of it, at some point, I actually became the general secretary of what would have become a very powerful youth movement in exile, and it was known as SAPO, the South African Youth Revolutionary Congress. Now, at the time I was actually based in Lesotho, and things were rather difficult, but I don't think this is the one part that I want to get into. At some point I'm going to, in fact, I have written quite, extensively on SAPO, and I can refer the viewers to a very lengthy article that I did for the South African History Online. And part of what I do there, is to explain that, the student movement did not only begin and end, in 1976, 77, but it went on in exile to establish itself as a distinct group, from both the ANC and the PAC. And in very, very real terms, there was an understanding in young people at the time, when they encountered the exiled formations, that 15-year period between 61 and 75, which we often characterize as a period of political quiescence across the country, that there was a kind of a definite paralysis and absence, of the exiled formations inside South Africa. So the one thing that we haven't talked about in South Africa quite extensively is the fact that, among the students, among the core group of the students of 1976, I actually refer to them as the class of 76. There was an understanding that at that point, the ANC was actually defunct, and there was evidence to actually point to that, and that the PAC was dead. Now, this is the perception that was quite, widespread among the students at the time. But this is also, again, if people are interested to go back and get a sense of how the students actually understood and responded to the exiled formations. This is something that we need to be talking about today, because, the narrative that we have about the exiled formations, both the PAC and the ANC, is that they were a meaningful kind of, opposition to the white supremacist state. But the state in which they are today reflects something different. And therefore, the rot could have been at that point, at the point at which they actually become, visible to South Africans after that 15-year period or that 15-year hiatus. So part of what I'm trying to say here is that it is at this stage that we have to be looking at the period, 1976 to 85, and see what is it, about the ANC and the PAC that we completely misunderstood. Because if we understood what they are and what they were, particularly the ANC wouldn't have had the kind of popularity that it enjoyed in the 1980s. Yeah.
Yeah, it's typical ukhuluma after I'm a hot man. Mina ngiyawuthi asikasi. Nah, I ain't bet you. Mina I'm just a normal kasi boy. Even my English is not your police English, It's your kind of English, without accent. I remember back in the days. I used to act on Generation, you know that. No, I was a cameo, serious cameo. I had more than 50 calls. And one of the reasons that maybe I didn't make it so far, because they taught you English, like, this model, excuse me. And they gave me tutors and I get the bag. I want you to know, they're out there. We need to consume and not consume. So I come from that, Yeah, school of thought, I'm a chitasekasi. And I can tell you, ipachu kalingatekasi. Ipachu. And for me, I distinguish between economical crime, political crime, the crime, they don't, I'll come to that. Ipachu, it's hijacking. But we're hijacking the people that we needed to hijack. As I said, I come from that, school in the 70s. At that time, mathematician was popular. Amazimzim were popular. ANC was nowhere. This is where Lanjeva team, but he was somewhere in the background. And like Upra Steve has said, it's quite interesting how ANC surpassed all these other organizations. But we understand why. Because the Americans, they took Mandela, they made him Michael Jackson. And for the first time, our struggle had a starring, like Sarafina. So when you saw the movie Sarafina, we saw one person lifting his hand up Zulu, punching the air. Such, since when the struggle we had one person, where we congregate around one person, it has never happened, even though, there were structures, and especially in my 80s, there was no register, we just joined, So when I started joining CODESA in my 84, I was still a young boy. Winnie Mandela, I think, was coming back to Soweto, Panford. But later on, I would move to PAC. Thinking with the PAC, they are the real, struggle icons. They are maybe the real ANC as they, parade themselves. Because they come from the Youth League of 1944 after the ANC has betrayed the struggle in a Freedom Charter. So the Sobukwe's generation, the Muchuping took over. So I followed that. And little did I know, Uguti, it was going to be worse. Because remember, the PAC was banned. It only existed for less than a year, so they had not formulated proper structures. So in Exile, we are told which it was the same because it was a two-line struggle. So we're comrades, we're fighting. Like today we hear with the Indona Zaseka has Kawategi. I know a couple of guys who came to me. They say, Ike, when I went to Exile, 76, I left with my girlfriend. I'm 30. Sometimes they send you to Nigeria or they take your woman. So they say it was a common thing with if Uche but with a spy, and once they label you a spy, anything can happen. Not you, you'll be raped, you'll be tortured. Like in many interviews I had mentioned, I understood mentioning Power FM, when they went to Exile, they were given prevention tablets, not guns. It shows that's what she said. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize, but I'm not the only one who had it. There are articles that are written, and there's so many people who came back. There's so many ladies, they become sangomas. When they come back with pregnancy. So that's why I'm in media, come Exile. Or yini Exile leyo yezangoma. Mina my wife will never go to become a sangoma. No. We must make an extra room there. We initiate you here. You know, we learn all the books by Trevor Van Credo Mutu. Then you become a sangoma. Of course, my way are fit for oil and they've got above Viagra. They know how to tell a woman on. So I'm far listen to but the next thing, find about doctor. I mean, I don't allow my woman to go to a male doctor. No. You know, I had a girlfriend, let me tell you. I had a girlfriend, you know, she was pregnant. She saw a gynecologist. Mangeti, it's another Indian guy. Actually, no, but it's an old Indian man. No, I mean, do I see Indian women? Because they're always covered, I'm a Muslim. But whether they can see our women, and they know where to touch. Because they touch and they, how's your man? And I say, oh, he's at home. The next thing, same shade. But I come from that generation when the new South Africa dream, you know, was cooked. About Soros, they came to Newtown, we rejected them. And after that, there was a Woya Makabasa, Mazimzim, because the ANC could not accept that the youth of South Africa have rejected the George Soros consensus of New South Africa. Some of us, we realized that the CODESA was not going to sell us that dream, you know, that they promised. It was a so-called New World Order. Everybody's talking about the New World Order. We opposed it then, so I opposed it then. So most of my comrades who came, some of them, they formed into APLA structures, APLA by day, PASO by night. We started to organize Amachitashama Highs because that was the struggle. And it's very funny that those people are not recognized. They are termed as criminals because those were people who were active. And they've done better than the guerrillas because I can ask you, when was the last time, or you heard about the ANC, they fought against soldiers. I get more soldiers, we MK, you must fight other soldiers. We did not see them. We saw, you know, us here, EKAS, we were active. When these guys, they were nowhere. This was about Chief Lucas Mangope, but hey, don't trust these guys. Because you'd remember about Chief Lucas Mangope, yeah. They knew these guys better than us, because they went to school together. Those years, the schools were few, you know, the universities, so they went to school together. I mean, when I was born, Mandela was already in jail. But no, let's come and say about what came up and Titi, you know, but we trusted them. So I'm not surprised today when they are what they are, because some of them, I mean, about to check up Zuma, we got to from Exile. But if reaching, so yeah, that's where we find ourselves.
Right. Nkululeko, ne? Yeah. I was born here in. I represent the generation of the beneficiaries of these struggles. I like to see myself as that person. I grew up in a family of teachers, very strict and all of that, but very people who were conscientized, who have histories in Ngata and histories in ANC, children of priests. My grandmother taught at Tumezoin for 30 years. Yeah. So I think they also present an ideological positioning when I plastic model of what this struggle was about. Yeah. Because when I grew up, we, at some point, you knew about the Mandela. Yeah. Correct. You know, you knew consciously that there's a problem, especially when you think about the state of emergency of 85. We had hippos driving all around to Soweto. The hippo in Amapuno, Bazoni, Amatina, Macrest, Banchobe, Ichia Kessias. So I saw the last remnants of apartheid. Yeah. You know, so I'd like to think about it like that because Ichia Kessi, I remember the Badmabarisha, which was Itiniana, Eli Silva, and Amala, and Young Kediatore, because you were pumping. But also, that generation of kids who went to private schools, like a model C. Macbeta, he already was coaching the Spanish and say 50 teachers. A 50 teachers experience intention. But I'm the youngest guy, I stand at 6. Yes. And at 30. i-outfit enteleza nazo zinakuma-24 khona-ke ngatshela stress athi stress wakafuna some homework e-economics umadla wathi yazi stress sibadala siyasheva futhi sinama-parts ngeke uzositshela lento sitshela lo. So I got to see the function and the dysfunction high school yaseGasi, and then experience model C type ithamanami yatsho wena amateksi so iyaphathula yenzani uke waba yinto la eSoweto iwolidlanga activist umuntu ofundisayo nani but si-conscientizwa nge-struggle and mostly it's through the prison ANC. I'm a scholar at the moment. I'm trying to complete my PhD as you were teaching me WITS and okay.
I mean, I couldn't find a course supervisor. Yeah, actually, I'm much about Ghana Park. No, I applied for a PhD in 2018. I got in there. I didn't have a course supervisor. I went for a course supervisor outside. I'll pay. But I'm
writing about Operation Tutula.
What's it when yes,
Probably there is
I never get a fake qualification.
Probably there is a political decision not to take you on because they know your ideological stance. But when it comes to Israel, I look at it as if Ike is throwing the baby out with the water. Respectfully so, Ike. In the sense, if there were no soldiers that we saw, maybe we need to think about it in terms of the might of the colonial state, right? In neutralizing the ANC, APLA, and everyone else who was in those camps. And to make sure that they stay there. Of course, we can talk about the atrocities of those who came into power because Chris Hani himself goes out and the MK puts him to death row, right?
Why?
Because of calling out.
No, these guys, they adopted an armed propaganda. They did not adopt the armed struggle with a clear purpose of overthrowing, setting up liberated zone like we've seen in other African countries. For them, it was putting pressure on the government of the day so that they can talk to them. Hence, these guys, they were scammers, about Oliver Tambo. That's why they were in London. So they would send one boy, but how shy and then they would take the paper clips and send them all over the world and say, this is our struggle. We were crying here in South Africa City, Tumeli Aka, Oliver Tambo's Funama Pazuga. They never did that. Instead, they will plant bombs and call the media, the journalists, and when it's also their arms. And then it will break into newspaper articles. They'll take that and go to United Nations, Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson spent a lot of money in the ANC. So they will go there, Peter Tosmat contribute. So these guys were scammers. They were not intending to win the struggle.
And this is to my point. Are we not throwing the baby out with the water, Presti?
Yeah, but I think
why are you insisting in it?
because are we then rationalizing all our struggle down to the point of that it was all about money and scamming, you know? Because any revolution will have its deficiencies here and there. But then we then say, the whole struggle of our black people, it was a negotiated settlement, I agree, where we came out worse off in many ways. But can we then say, all our struggle, Oliver Tambo, all of them were just scammers? And then legitimize maybe your own school, where you come from, and say, yeah, it was just us here. Because there were alliances with Angola, people in the front line. I mean, he also came back to criticize, but he didn't get support.
Can you imagine Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, in exile in Washington, D.C.? Do you know how ridiculous that sounds? No wonder these guys, they have no impact. We are fighting British Empire here, because remember, we were colonized by the British. They used the Afrikaners, as an extension. And when you go to live under Margaret Thatcher, secured by Margaret Thatcher's army, I mean, there's nothing that was going to come here. That's why ANC, they were hitting targets. And opposed to the PAC, we were saying, the security agents. That's why we share with they were bombing toilets. and from 1961 up to now, they even, failed to defend the masses against Inkatha. People were wearing overalls and gumboots. They were not there to be found. So for me, I'm telling the truth. These guys, if they played a part, a minimal, they even got to people fought for themselves. So these guys, we gave them too much credit. And for me, they were looties then, they are looties today, and they, for me, the less I say about them, the better. That's why even now, their female congress do not emerge, because some of them, we are told they are traumatized. And we know they struggle, even good TRC, people who came in, sexual violations, people who were killed. I mean, you learn, if you read statements with the class commission, they tried to come with the square commission to counter that. They said comrades were killed for asking questions, when are we going back to South Africa and fight? And then they say, you talk too much. Quattro camp, arrested, you are tortured from there. So how ridiculous can that be? And then you have stories, will send a comrade, a trained soldier, to say, me like, can cop me a sex zone and a friend would pay Wook Street. And what is that? And these guys are so slow for all this leadership. The Oppenheimers, when they met them, they said they were shocked for the first time because we had this idea with we met in a guy like Sabimbi on camp here. They said they saw these guys, they were polished. They said these guys, they like the finer things. Let us pump in money. Hence you see Abu Abdul Pamji, all these soccer administrators, they used to go to Lusaka, give them monies. Give them cars. They said they were driving, luxurious cars. Hence, that's why I'm saying to you, many students from 76, even Nabo said, they said some of their comrades, when they went to London, they found their comrades drinking champagne and cigars, chasing white prostitutes. About Tabumbeki, they were known for that, because hey, this guy, he's known for that.
Yeah, but I think, I know. I think a lot of, the narrative that comes out, it can actually be substantiated. But I think, we need to have a kind of a nuanced understanding of it, which is why which is why
we'll answer in Windows.
And to be sure, the narrative you're referring to is Ike's narrative as it's coming up.
It encapsulates that. I mean, we can I just open the door quick? Please.
No, it's fine. You can continue, Bastif.
Oh, yeah. I'm actually thinking, but I'm not going to go into this in detail. If we had broken this down into the three periods, the three phases of armed struggle, it would be easier, because part of what we may not be doing is just to generalize. But looking at 61 to 75 wouldn't be so much important, except to point to it, particularly because of the geopolitics of the time. I mean, if armed struggle was going to be pursued immediately after 61 in exile, it could only happen from Zambia, Malawi, and probably Tanzania. This is because the Buleswa group of countries, Botswana, Lesotho, and Swaziland, there were no-go areas, for military campaigns. So that was out of the question. So the geopolitics of the subcontinent would have been a hindrance, which is why they engaged on the Wanki campaign. And that would have ended up in Zim. That's understandable. There was no other way around it. The second phase is when Angola and Mozambique become independent, because what then that means is that there is now an opportunity for cross-border insurgency. Now, South Africa is within striking reach. And this is where we can talk about, you are talking about conventional warfare.
Yes.
Where South African soldiers, SADF, meet MK and they fight it out. The only time when that appeared to happen was at Kwito Kanavale. Before Kwito Kanavale, That was not
There are massive losses of numbers for the ANC there.
But if conventional warfare was out of the question, what form would
Did the ANC fight did they fight Sadaf in Angola? No. Or where it was the Cubans?
No, the issue that, yeah, we will come to that.
Because we are told good they were in camps. They were told like children, good, don't go out.
Yeah.
You know, we will fight. They were in camps, but it's dangerous. You know, when I got the 80s, like really the 90s. The time I go starting, but keep up, I cannot go chanting. I'm told with the ANC, they were told, but you know, they must stay. The only thing that they could provide is intelligence, because they knew Africans, they could interpret, but say, you know. But other than that, they were killed by their own comrades. They were killed by their own comrades because they say some of them, they were asking, when are we going to join in and fight?
Yeah, but
and then,
I think that we will come to.
I'm asking, did the ANC fight? No, it was the Cubans who were fighting.
Okay. In fact, Molora would know.
Yes.
Molora would know that my position on this is that, you look at the circumstances leading to, I didn't want to get to Kuto Carnavale before I actually explained what then happens between 1976 and 1985. I think if we have taken care of 61 to 75, we said the geopolitics was a hindrance. Now, what actually happens between 76 and...
Can you reply to this as we explain?
Yeah.
Until then, during our discussion at this service, if we are not talking about a little bit about that 61 to 70s period, because we are talking about how to form this armed struggle. We've got people who are learning about this from the book, where they declare, which we're going to use violence.
Okay, let's
sabotage and all of that.
Let's deal with that quick.
Yes.
A concept document is generated in 1961, and that concept document is actually intended to explain the form of armed struggle. The rationale is there. It's the form of armed struggle. What form will armed struggle actually assume? So you have options. One of the options is to actually, given the South African situation, the most sensible option would have been urban terrorism. And this has to do with the structure of South Africa's rural communities. Could you be able to engage the struggle at any time between 61 and 75? We said the geopolitics didn't allow that. But now that after 75, you can operate from Mozambique in particular. You can operate from Mozambique, which is where they were operating from largely. Before, because the Western Front was before we got expelled. Yeah, we'll come to 84. 84 is up.
This United States, they expelled us.
No, it's the Nkomati. It's the Nkomati Accord of 84, and we should come to it and explain, because when you explain the Nkomati Accord, you're also explaining whether armed struggle was actually viable in the 1980s. And Nkomati Accord...
No, I'm just mentioning it in passing because sometimes when we fight these things, you're told that we helped you during apartheid, but not knowing what Botswana became a hostile country. Swaziland was a hostile country. Lesotho, after Labua Jonathan, they expelled the comrades. That's where maybe even Annie was sacrificed or compromised. And then we are told, what we helped you during apartheid. And then when you say no, they say you're xenophobic. I'm just highlighting. With these countries, they never played.
You don't get that from Botswana, Basotho, or Swaziland. You largely get that from the Zimbabweans. You say Zimbabweans,
but they're
Mozambicans. But hardly ever from Botswana and say we helped you and all that. They had no sovereignty. That's the reality. There was no staging ground.
I think in the beginning I said the Boleso group of countries were a no-go area. And that is because if you think about Lesotho, for instance, and think about the post-uprising of 64 to 65, which was the PAC uprising. Some of the operatives involved in that uprising were actually based in Lesotho. And when Lebelo made the statements that he made, and the South African security system started moving into those areas that were mentioned, some of them were actually inside Lesotho. And guess who actually apprehended them? The British police in Lesotho, because Lesotho up to 1966. It was a British colony. So this happens in 1965. So the South African police actually went into Lesotho and engaged in an operation that actually got those people out.
Steve even posted to Lebelo Jonathan. Lebelo was taken out of power because they said it was friendly to the ANC. And the people of Lesotho, they celebrated that. They said the ANC must get out of
Let's deal with, because that's another, I think that's another issue. Let's deal with it, and it's important. At any time between 1966 and 1985, and that's a 20-year period, Lebelo Jonathan was literally a puppet of the South African state. He was a puppet of B.J. Foster. He was a puppet of P.W.
And there lies in.
And in actual fact, the issue here, let's clarify this. Because of the uprising of 64-65, Lesotho actually became hostile to the PAC as opposed to the ANC. At any time in the 70s, if you think about any commemoration that would be, taking place in Lesotho, the ANC, in fact, think about the June 16 commemoration, for instance. The ANC trained June 16 for itself, and they staged the June 16 commemoration in Lesotho because they were in cahoots with the Lebelo Jonathan government. No, under Lebelo, the ANC was at home. The Lesotho government was more hostile to the PAC than it was to the ANC. But at the same time, Lesotho has got this dynamic too, that you had the BCP, the Basotho Congress Party, which was in opposition to Lebelo Jonathan. Now, the BCP had very strong ties with the PAC. In actual fact, Molora was a Mosotho national. He actually came from Basotholand. So in actual fact, there was that kind of organizational link between the BCP and the PAC. Interestingly, now, when Lebelo Jonathan was on his last legs, the BCP had a very strong military army called the Lesotho Liberation Army. And they started operating seamlessly in Lesotho after 1979. So from 79 up to 85, they engaged Lesotho, and Lebelo Jonathan was becoming unpopular. And it is at that point in 86 that Lebelo Jonathan was actually, taken out of the equation.
Lebelo is taken out when South Africa threatened. Yeah, it stood where they closed up Lesotho. They said nothing coming out, nothing going years.
What year was that?
It should be around 83, 84. No, 84, 85.
Remember the second Lesotho attack. There was the Lesotho attack of 82, which killed 42 people. 30 of them being Basotho nationals and 12 being, South African refugees. And this thing that they were MK cadres is misleading, because you have to be absolutely certain that all of them were actually affiliated to the APLA and were actually MK cadres, because it is questionable. We'll talk about why it would be questionable. But the issue here is that the 76 to 85 period becomes absolutely critical. And the point I was trying to make is that when you think of the form of armed struggle that was going to be undertaken, there were two options. Yes. You could either have urban terrorism, or you could have a conventional kind of warfare. Conventional warfare.
We ruled out the conventional warfare.
Out of the
but at that point, I went.
But also ruled out. But also ruled out is the kind of struggle that can I pay? Let me say yes. Let's support it. Because the kind of struggle that Zanla. And people say things about ZANU and ZANLA. ZANLA until 1980 was the most revolutionary army Africa has ever seen. Zebra was nothing. ZANLA was the Zebra was what MK is. MK and Zebra are 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. They are the same. But ZANLA was something else. ZANLA was something else. It was the most revolutionary army on the subcontinent, in fact, on the African continent, one could say. And ZANLA engaged in rural warfare, the kind of warfare that Mao Zedong would have engaged in. So there were lessons from the Chinese Revolution that ZANLA actually embraced. If you read the book, All by Ourselves, by Judy Frederickson, she actually explains that beautifully. She does this after 1981, 81, when it was still there, when it was still fresh, soon after independence in 1980. Now let's come back to this. The ANC cannot engage in rural struggles. What is rural South Africa at this time? It is the Bantustans and white commercial farms. That should tell you. The Bantustans were out of the question. This thing that Transkei was involved in armed struggle is rubbish. It only promotes Bantu Holomesa here. In actual fact, it is rubbish. There was no such thing. The Bantustans were actually created specifically for purposes of creating the borders around white South Africa. And they served that purpose. Buputazana is known to have sent a lot of people to Pretoria. They Izikluwe was apprehended, in not only Buputazwana. So yes, in fact, a lot of people were arrested in Buputazwana and taken to Pretoria. So the Bantustans were out of the question. And that's rural South Africa. The commercial farms of the Free State, there was no way you could start engaging, in armed struggle in the Free State. Gabriel, the guy who the PAC claimed, he actually acted on his own. The point I'm trying to make is that rural armed struggle in South Africa was out of the question. What did that leave? Where did it leave MK? Urban terrorism. But what is urban terrorism? It is what the Irish Republican Army was doing in Great Britain. That's what the MK was supposed to do here. They did. There are examples of what would have been. Silverton, in actual fact, yes. Silverton, Sasol. Well, Sasol, yes, but Sasol too. Except that we split things here. Sasol is, in fact, hitting at hard targets. And that's the issue. It's economic sabotage, which in itself, if we go back to the concept document of 1961, that's what that concept document said should be done. We are crippling the capitalist infrastructure of the apartheid state. Now that in itself is actually, what South Africa needed was urban terrorism of the kind that the Irish Republican Army was engaging in. That was the struggle of the 70s. The Palestinian Liberation Organization hijacking airplanes, exploding bombs in crowded cities. That's the kind of urban terrorism that was required in South Africa. But the concept document discouraged that completely. Why? Initially, it did not make it explicit. So between 61 and 75, you don't get a sense, of this thing. When do you begin to get a sense of it? It is when Montimuko murders 2 civilians and Solomon Mahlangu takes the credit. Because it is Montimuko who murdered those 2 civilians here at Koch Street shooting. That was the beginning of what would have been a path towards urban terrorism. But what was the ANC's response?
How was it the beginning? Because we are told Guti, Solomon Mahlangu, though he was carrying an AK, he was given pamphlets to distribute for April 16 awareness. That's what he was given. And unfortunately, he was not familiar about near Johannesburg. That's why he then introduced Foster, of which is a betrayer, Solomon Mahlangu. And you remember, Solomon Mahlangu, after he was arrested, the ANC denied him. They denied him because they said they were involved in what was not the policy of the ANC, of killing sanctioned. No, killing people.
Yeah.
They named him later on when they realized that he's gaining momentum. He became popular, but they distanced themselves from Solomon Mahlangu.
Okay. I don't know if we monopolize this part.
I'm saying, here's the point, Maggie. Aren't we implicitly talking about the power of the South African state? Because we could be talking about Uti, yes, these were cowards, this didn't happen. But right through Africa, you've got a state. Look at right now, Hamas, right? Let's take that example.
A good example.
How strong is the Israeli state against Hamas? That's the same type of what they're trying to say. So what I'm trying to say is, if you look at the relations of whatever I mean, you've had the Soviet Union spend 13 million between this period of armed struggle of the MK, right? So there is something, there is a spend. Right?
You in church.
And man, my man.
So it's in a year. We didn't have arms. That did make us. We were pretending the year when I eat, I guess so, yeah. We are fighting with apartheid ages.
You had no choice.
They beat all the 10 ships that were under apartheid, beat Ruvi,
I tell you, it's young people.
not the homelands. We go to Israel and we go to, Pretoria, we're direct. We had no arms, but we were fighting. When you never made up excuses with the might, of John Foster, P.W. Porter, we were fighting. So these ones, they were drinking homemade cool, on kombucha. They were making it. That's why when they came back, we saw them for the first time when Ali was buried at FNP. We saw guys with big stomachs, with poser faces. That's why there's this slogan, but kini bocho, some konto. What were they say? So I went, not to kini bocho. How can you celebrate so?
So our liberation is based on, so what makes the apartheid state give in? Is it economics only?
The apartheid government, they gave in because of the perestroika and glasnost. When Reagan met Gorbachev, they started to come up with peace talk. And it was inevitable. When these two forces, meeting up, the foot soldiers, they had to make peace. That's why some of the guys who went to exile, November 1989, 90, they were told, no, your countries, they're starting to negotiate, go back. So it was that. Had not the Berlin Wall failed, ANC would still be in exile today.
But your actual position is that no actual armed struggle took place. And that was your initial point of departure that you
Yeah, they were coming up with an propaganda. They were hitting one target, once, so that there's an action. Because remember the donors in.
Let me just put in this. I'm not trying to monopolize your time. Consistent with your position, they didn't give in. There was nothing for them to give in to. If you are insisting, as you see, all there was an armed propaganda camp, not intended to make any substantive shift. So there was nothing to give in.
You know why? Because they were looters. Right. They were eating donor money. That's why they had to run away from camps, because these guys, they were filthy rich. That's why they had big stomachs, so they came here. Right. Their foot soldiers were suffering. Right. So for them to gain money or continuously gain money, they had to pretend. That's why I think would say, just send one guy to shoot so that they can see that we're fighting. Who? The donors.
I'll declare myself from once. I'm in sympathy with your position. There was no war in the first place. But I think consistent with that, we should then see saying nobody gave in to anything. It was all controlled by them in the first place. What happened in CODESA was a staff meeting. You see, when there's between two flanks of the same beast. So in a sense, removing our endorsement of their narrativization and their terms of discourse. Yeah, you see, so then nobody gave in, nobody fought anything here. Yeah, so if everything there, it seems to be continuous.
No, inside the country, we fought because we believed in this narrative. Yeah. Remember, we did not know the ANC, because when I was born, Mandela was already in jail. Yeah. People who knew them was our Chief Lucas Mamawape. That's why we were Pantiti. Hey, Woody Wahela, Musadi, so don't trust these guys. So, we're fighting, innocently so. When Oliver Tambo said, make the country ungovernable, we thought that it was genuine. That's why Mrs. Kobe was my target. They stopped us. And they called us about Komtsoti, they called us about thugs. That's when they started, fighting gangs like Abu Makabasa. Makabasa, you look at the Makabasa. They were stealing cars, in white communities, go and show. But they became an enemy because they were not complying with the core Naronivatam, which now they've eaten the Rothschild's monies, the kid singers. They've met the the open hammers who gave them money. But stop, guys. Remember those days, the cars were written, I love Soweto, the bumper stickers, I love Alex. So we're continuously destabilizing. So they antagonize us. Hence, Winnie Mandela became an enemy because she sided with the youth. All of them, they hated Winnie Mandela, including Wadifa Tambo. They ostracized her. And that's where we find ourselves. But what I'm trying to say is that the ANC did not liberate us. Actually, we liberated the ANC and the PAC. They were homesick, wanting to come back, not knowing how. And fortunately, the geopolitics, the Berlin Wall started to fall. And then things were eased up. And I remember in 1990 when they were starting to march and do it, one liberal white woman, when the police was destabilizing Amamatches, said, why are they shooting at them? Look at them, they're so nice. Brother, they're fighting a civil something. They're instincts of cars. I was like MP. So that's where we find ourselves.
But let's get to the issue with in terms of the ANC's understanding, again, of the period 76 to 85, because I think we are started with the how does the ANC understand its impact during this period? You bring in the issue of armed propaganda. Now, that is precisely what the ANC was doing. It said so. Well, it set in motion the June 16 detachment. Remember, the ANC gets to be rejuvenated by the Soweto uprisings. Up until then, you still have the recruits in the camps being the Lutuli detachment, of 1961, 62. There was nothing happening between 61 right down to 75. So they are getting a new injection, coming out of the 1976, 77 uprising, and they constitute the June 16 detachment. And it is the June 16 detachment that then has the responsibility to undertake what the ANC refers to as armed propaganda campaign. It actually launches it as armed propaganda campaign. Now, but what is the ANC's understanding of that? I think this is important. What the ANC is saying about APC, armed propaganda campaign, is that it is intended to mobilize the masses inside the country. What do they mean by that? They mean that as the sabotage campaign continues, because armed propaganda campaign is in fact sabotage campaign. But for instance, Sasol, this attack on Sasol, it's a sabotage campaign meant to do what? To mobilize the people inside the country. Now, the South African History Online has got a list of
attacks on police stations.
Yeah, this is what that's what I'm explaining, that the South African History Online has a list of all cross-border insurgencies between 77 with Solomon Masango and Monty, right down to 1988. Now, all in all, there are over 600 acts of insurgency. Now, all of those were meant as armed propaganda campaign. They were meant to mobilize the masses, inside South Africa into what happened in the 80s. So what they will say is that APC was successful because its objective was to mobilize the communities inside the country. And it succeeded because the communities inside the country were actually mobilized. And from 1984, in the war, you had 10 years of popular violence, from 1984 to 1993. That, they will say, was the work of the armed propaganda campaign. That's what the armed propaganda campaign was meant to accomplish. And they will say it did.
But there are also events like municipal strikes and all sorts of things that
all of that
galvanize the people to
no, but all of that we did. No, but they will say you all did that because you were made conscious of it. No, you just referred to attacks on police stations, and if you think about it, I mean, particularly where the police stations were attacked would be Soweto. Soweto police stations were hit. And it's interesting that people in Diepkloof don't even know who was responsible for the attacks on police stations. And yet the guy actually came from Diepkloof. He came from Zone 3 here in Diepkloof, Marcus Mutaung. Marcus Mutaung and two others were actually responsible for these attacks on Kliptown Police Station, Orlando Court, Moroka Police Station, Jabulani Police Station. Marcus was actually a student at Majibane High School. And he was a friend of my brothers. Actually, they were classmates. So he was part of the cohort, and we should talk about these guys because they left around the 4th of August, and they went 76. Yeah, the 4th of August, and they immediately went into MK. And those are the people who became responsible, who carried out the armed propaganda campaign. The police stations that they hit were in Soweto. There was one in Pretoria, the Wonderboom police station. I don't know if you know about it, that the Wonderboom. Marcus were responsible for that.
Just to be clear, so Nalwena, are we arguing that there was some form of armed struggle?
The issue here, the point, what is the intention in armed struggle? Because what I'm trying to say, I'm telling these guys, they didn't adopt armed struggle. We're using the armed struggle to overthrow
The state. They wanted to pressure. Yes.
Yes. And hence they never told the people that that was the case. We just want to put pressure so that these guys could talk to us.
Okay, to add then, Ike, let me ask you this. The activities of those who were fighting inside Ukshaya Ipat, who sanctions that movement?
That's the interesting thing, because it could be, it bears noticing with it. The ANC's own relationship, former relationship to this campaign is ambivalent at best. I want to, you see what I'm saying? They don't they don't go out and claim this is our campaign, this is our people. You see, Plastic could go on and explain, for most part, the ANC refuses. Doesn't even want to touch them with a 9-foot pole. Do you see? And that is the reality.
I'll give you one short example. In November 92, 93, in the PAC, when Sabelo Palmer said it's going to be the year of the Great Storm, because I was there. I'm one of the first guys, because by then I'd moved from ANC to PAC.
Yeah.
I said, you no longer sing about leaders because they betrayed us. They wanted to go to CODESA. We were in arms. We were disarmed the security agencies. You had expelled some of them. And it is our youth comrades who started to target the police, who started to target the security agencies. The PAC had no option. Had to endorse. Including Sabanopam, when he says the year of the Great Storm, he didn't know what he was talking about because they were being expelled inside because they were sent back to South Africa after the Berlin War. So it is the youth who refused to succumb to CODESA. Many of the guys, they got killed. They took up arms and say they are us. Happened by night. A shooting thing into Kanzibiri. And PAC had to endorse them. That's why during CODESA, the PAC leadership was arrested. Some of them, Alexander, they ran away. Because the Goldstone Commission came up investigating all these attacks. And they found out in 2 days, which there is no APLA here. These are youth, who are refusing to succumb to the Tosobo sponsors. So it is the locals, young men and women,
Who then overtake.
Yeah, they were defying the leadership. They were defying both the ANC and the PAC. In taking up arms on their own, hitting police of the day. So that's where we find ourselves. So when you say in the 80s, of course, Oliver Tambo said, made this country ungovernable. But where was he? Sitting there sipping champagne in England.
They could argue that he was politically mobilizing.
Fidel Castro was, in front. Che Guevara was told, Buti, when you're just a doctor, you must not be in front. They said Che Guevara defied the orders. He was in front. That's why Castro, when the Cubans rejected Fidel, he said, no, we cannot reject this man because he took up struggle. He's an Argentinian. And he was in the forefront. We called him, recruited him to be the doctor, but he refused. He can't take a persever. He risked his life. That's why there was a slogan, but be like Che, of which the ANC tried to steal it, but be like Ani. And they said, be like Che, because Che sacrificed himself. He was in the forefront. He was a medical doctor. He could have been a Zulu of the day in Africa. He was there. In his will, he says, I leave nothing to my wife and daughter. The only regret that I have, which I'm not living long enough to fight imperialism where it surfaces, where he was betrayed, is it in Bolivia. So as a leader, you must be in the forefront. He was not wearing a suit. So these guys, they're wearing suits and, high collar shirts, and then they're telling us.
But how then do we understand, and maybe Steve, you guys will come in, the establishment of military camps, these campaigns? Aren't we just talking then about a neutralized campaign or a faltered campaign? Because then, hear me out, then are we saying, what do we base our so-called freedom that we have today? What comes to pass that these whites, is it just an economic decision? It's not. I agree, that we were shortchanged, right? But maybe hence we are still paying for blood.
Maybe it is what the money I wanted, because remember the ANC, I can see that you come from the ANC, but I'll tell you, the ANC is what the Lebelo clarified, it's a civil rights movement. It was a civil rights movement from 1912. It was a reaction of 1910. These are clever blacks who wanted to be incorporated into South Africa. They never had the intention to overthrow anything. They wanted, to be part of the white society, because South Africa...
So they were not asking for
it. But I read letters to the Queen. They even sent 5,000 men during World War, they are sending 5,000 men to help the British crowd to fight.
In hope
but they keep on pleading and begging and saying, but guys, we are educated more than these other ones, we are doctors. And why are you not included in the franchise of South Africa? Because we even sent men to die for British Empire. So 1990, that dream was realized. That's why they coined the PEE. They started the PEE. They were co-opted because Oppenheimer has said it. Now, Michael Thatcher, 1991, Michael Thatcher said if the ANC thinks that they can come in here and take our mines, our minerals, they're in for a shock. Hence, the army pays it Botswana. Hence, the Oppenheimer saying, you know what, we need to keep these guys a certain percentage so that they can guard this economy. They were included in the franchise. They become the clever blacks. And I'm surprised even a guy like Dikgang Moseneke is celebrated. He was very unpopular in the PAC. Then he denied even the PAC, because I know for a fact when he was admitted as an attorney, he was asked, but how can you become an attorney while you were fighting the very same laws of the day and you are not respecting the laws of the day? You know what he said? He said, sent to the shop to buy bread. I saw a group of people running, and then I was apprehended. I like Mandela. This is where I give Mandela and Pam Fisher credit, because they were asked when their names had to be moved or removed from the role of practicing legal practitioners. They said they had to obey their conscience. Their consciousness comes first more than the laws of the day. So it was like that, So these guys, I remember when we were Fatara too, because you say it, and you even mentioned IFP, and you shouldn't mention IFP in that because IFP, that means that was the setting. You IFP members, the IFP they killed black people. IFP was against everything that the black man was. Masithi as a kwela, IFP said to their they kill students. Masithi stay away, IFP says no, stay away. Masithi
Actually, that's where I want to use it. To do the second case, because now we are closing, to say, what is it about the struggle that coming today, you then realize that this was a farce, or these are the gains from going to struggle? What are the things? And name organization, much like Ike's doing, to say these ones were the stumbling block. They didn't need the revolution. And this is why today we are here, because of this. Just paid it as we close.
I think you've done the hosting well. Cool. So this is to the plot.
I think we are concluding our thesis statement.
All right. Wow. Okay. So, all right. So again, I was kind of still caught up with the conversation they were having here. I wasn't sure that we were ready to go on and graduate to any second stage. The very legitimacy of this quote unquote armed struggle that we're involved in is under question. You see, everything else falls apart from that. We need to establish and be clear where it is. The claims that Ike is making, that I personally am sympathetic to, you see, need to be taken seriously. As well as the objections, with the sense, are you saying really that there was nothing there all this time? How do you even reconcile ourselves as a black South African people to the reality, to the possibility that all along we are saying we're involved in this arms liberation struggle, we've got people representing, but there is nothing actually going on there. What kinds of psychological shifts needs to effect within the collective psyche to as black people in South Africa? Are we willing to counter?
And may also say, where is the power, the agency of the black people? Because now the agency through Ike is represented through the youth, frustrated, that is then termed comtools.
Yeah.
And almost nothing else.
But everything else was ordered so that I would not have the agency. So the fact that in the 80s there was this popular movement and an upsurge from below that Ike is attesting to, it wouldn't go anywhere. You couldn't have gotten anywhere because the precautions had already been taken against any such possibility going anywhere at all.
By our own.
By our own. In fact, the development ever since, I think from the 1960s coming on, was such that was.
But then are we so weak as a people that we are choreographed through any revolution as a black people? Because almost then that's what we are arguing.
Our narrative is choreographed.
I'm thinking there are quite a few, strands, that are left hanging. One of the questions is what in raised with the power of the state, and we keep saying apartheid. And this is the one thing that, we need to understand. Up until 1979, the struggle in South Africa was not an anti-apartheid struggle. The idea, the label anti-apartheid struggle was, sort of engineered into the struggle narrative. So and insinuated, maybe even insinuated, so as to actually redirect it elsewhere. But the struggle was for black emancipation. Up until 79, if you ask, what are we fighting for? We are fighting for black emancipation. The reason I'm bringing this up is to show that paradigm shift happens at the end of the 1970s. When we go into the 1980s, the struggle is no longer about, is for black emancipation. What is the struggle about? And this is where we made the mistake again. We leave out important historical detail. By 1979, the Freedom Charter is being introduced back into the South African narrative. And who does that? It is CODESA. Now remember, everybody else is banned. Only CODESA has just been started. And where was CODESA first initiated? I think people don't really seem to think about that. It was here in Soweto, and it was here in Diepkloof. The very first CODESA structure after, in 1979 was established here in Diepkloof. The issue here is that CODESA adopted the Freedom Charter as a blueprint for the liberation struggle. If that CODESA was going to be defining the struggle in the 1980s, that struggle was going to be the struggle of the Freedom Charter. What it meant is that the struggle for black emancipation, not only did it take the back seat, it was completely wiped out. So the popular psyche here was that this is an anti-apartheid struggle. But remember, who were fighting an anti-apartheid struggle? It is British NGOs, non-government organizations in Britain. The Labour Party in Britain was an anti-apartheid formation. It was fighting anti-apartheid struggles. We were fighting the struggle for black emancipation. And when the Freedom Charter was reintroduced, it embraced the struggle that is an anti-apartheid struggle, which is why the language of the ACs was that the struggle is an anti-apartheid struggle. But that was downgrading the struggle from being the struggle for black emancipation. And I'll tell you what, the struggle for black emancipation is extremely difficult to accomplish. But you should fight it. Now, what did they do? They sidestepped it. And they went for, they went for low-hanging fruit. And the low-hanging fruit was, in fact, it was a struggle against petty discrimination. This is what it was about. And that's how it was doing. That's the first thing. The second thing here is that the popular movement of the 1980s also adopted the Freedom Charter. When the labor movement was reinstituted from 1980, in fact, the labor movement does not, in fact, come out of struggles in the workplace. The labor movement was actually initiated as a result of a permission after a commission of inquiry. The Wehen Commission sat down and advised P.W. Botha and said, you must allow trade unions to exist, because then you can be able to deflect the rage, the anger away from management into those kinds of issues. And that happened. Trade unions were established, and that's the popular movement then took that character, the character of it being an anti-apartheid movement. The last point I want to make here is that just in terms of identifying, because here we are talking about the struggle of 1984, and we call it popular violence. Now, how did we identify the enemy of the people? And I'm going to make this point here, and I'm proving it some way, that in actual fact, the think tank, people who thought through the processes of what the struggle should be in the 1980s were not black people. They did not come out of Soweto. It was not us. The think tank was the white, we call it the white left, the white Marxist-Leninist tradition was redefining the struggle for us.
Effectively, people whose families, whose relatives would not be affected by the consequences of their lofty ideas, isn't it? And their insistence that they be realized. So, in a sense, we were the laborats, if you will, of the 1980s moments in the townships, would you say?
In actual fact, the issue here becomes who were then the leadership? Who was in the leadership of COSAT? Who was in the leadership of the UDF? The UDF is an interesting animal to look at. The issue here that is that when you look at the leadership of the UDF of the 1980s, it is not a progression from the leadership of the black radical movement of the 1970s. It is not. It is a completely new animal. The labor movement as well. They're a completely new animal, and they are defining and setting the agenda, of what the liberation struggle is going to be for the next 15 years, from 80 to 95. And that is where we are today.
Would you then say that era, I think around the 80s when the UDF started coming up, when the labor movements and the unions started coming up, was it a way of the state, the controlling state, trying to water down the struggle?
Not the struggle. You're right. Not the struggle. The black radical understanding of the struggle. That was the issue. The issue in white society in 1980 was not the Rekafar. White society was not bothered about the Rekafar or the red menace. White society was particularly concerned about the Swart Khafar, and you had to contain the Swart Khafar. And one way of doing so was to reinvent what that struggle was about. When you go into the labor setup, how do you define the antagonisms? Never Alexander was struggling to explain to hostel inmates in 1986. We gave him a floor and said, talk to these people. He was trying to explain what the enemy Now you have to make that transition. People had to make the transition from seeing the enemy of the people as white to seeing the enemy of the people as employer.
Frankly, he couldn't have made an argument. He could only go as far as making an assertion. He couldn't conceivably persuade that audience.
Why did so? Is that people are now saying one of the people who sold out were internal liberals within the African struggle. So they were saying the UTMs were, for example, the liberals. At the liberals, UDF, yes. Were they liberals? Were they watered down?
I've just explained that the initiative, in fact, in the white left circles today, you have a cohort of people that we refer to as the new radicals. They refer to themselves as the new radicals. The liberals are what Biko responded to, and he dealt a death blow on white liberalism in South Africa. Ikinusas, he dealt with it. But what Ikinusas do, after Biko dealt with it, they reinvented themselves into the radicals. And they actually have a book out called The New Radicals by Glenn Moss. Now, he sees himself as one of the new radicals. What is this new radicalism? It is the new radicalism of the 80s that says South Africa is racial capitalism. And therefore, what we are fighting here is a capitalist dispensation. And that's academic, but you had to translate that academic understanding of the struggle into popular struggles in the streets. How do you do that? You have to, in that complex understanding of capitalism, you have to lift out the state and make the state an enemy. But you want to have the state to have a face in the township. When does that face become? The councillor. So we killed the councillor in Sebokeng in 1984. We brutally murdered, Zameli, because he's a representation of the state. Now, how ridiculous can that be?
I want you to do this and name this new people. Like, for example, people are saying Pravin Gordhan was one of those. Yes, I want you to name them because it's very difficult for us who are not sure Gaddafi day.
What we will have to concede to, and this is being frank about it, what you will have to concede to is that within the leadership of the mass movement of the 1970s, there are those that went to Robben Island. There are those who were not arrested, who were not killed. They come back in the 1980s, and what do? They actually join the paradigm shift. And let's mention then, Lefi Morove is one of these people. He actually becomes involved in the UDF. Teremu Siwelikota is actually one of them. Eric Nololi is one of them. In fact, there's a new biography.
Because it helps us.
There's a biography out on Eric Molobi, and it actually shows the transition. Frank Chigani is one of these people. These are people who made that shift, away from...
How do they say? They matured.
They matured, and because
it's their own self-justification.
She matured into the ANC. That's what Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma says. We have to concede that there are leaders who actually did.
Yes, he never matured to do it.
TSC never did. Khoto Siyakulo never did. TSC will. But Sechaba Muntisi did. And Sechaba Muntisi, it gets to be worse. Can you finish it quickly? This is what Sechaba Muntisi does. In 1977, he becomes president of the SSRC. What does he do? He invites NUSAS back into the SSRC. They have a meeting here in Deep Kloof. It's the reversing Biko's thing about dealing with NUSAS. And what happens in that meeting? They are all arrested. They are all captured in that meeting. For the first time when they are with NUSAS, since Biko, they are captured by the security police and they are taken into custody. Among the members of NUSAS who were in that cohort that was captured on that day, they included Max Price, the former Vice Chancellor at UCT. Vice Chancellor at UCT, but he was Dean of Health Sciences at WITS. Max Price was in that group that was arrested here in Deep Kloof. And one of them, they were arrested around 10 in the morning. by 2 o'clock, Max Price's parents and the parents of the white students were dragging them out of John Foster Square. Sichapa Muititi and the rest of them remained, from 1977 Easter weekend, they went on trial in 1981. They stayed in prison for 5 years. That was meant to end the SSRC, and that was in 1977. But fortunately, Transformer Sona emerged, and the SSRC once again gained momentum. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Ike Khumalo.
No. I think, yeah. No, I think if we are to accept that there was no armed struggle and all of that, I think we tend to then, remove black agency in many ways, because then it means the heroes of the story are always dying. Those who are revolutionaries that are always dying. Then we are then accepting the might of the hegemonic state that at any given point then it is able to shut down, whether it's through traitors of our brothers or whoever. Then we are saying there's a state that was so powerful that it was able to neutralize even the most radicalist of blacks. Because even Amakabasa existing, for instance, Ike, it wasn't just in the Bama community pair. There were also problematic issues of communities feeling victimized and terrorized by some of these groups, and they changed into something else. So I'm saying there are complexities for me in how we understand the liberation struggle, and then I can't fully then accept that these people are just posers. Yes, we have posers, but we can't then rationalize everything down to, what then, as black people, what have we achieved? Even the so-called constitution of freedom, which I agree with you, is not what we're supposed to be getting. It's not freedom. But then, it's just been given. So even Namanje, we are still finding ourselves in a lull there, where the new state is still able to shut down our Ike and everyone else who's trying to not just exist in these relations of capital that we are in, but to restart.
We have one way of responding. One man. How we say what if justice is a period where black was absent even when they were present, and white was present even when they were absent. So what you see as black agency is precisely that. Let's be frank about it. In Exile, I often say, Tambo was absent even when he was present, and Joslovo was present even when he was absent.
Now for me, I would say this. It's interesting that in your discussions you will meet Inkat. I call them Inkat. I don't call them. Inkat has never fought for freedom.
No. I didn't say they fought for freedom. I said their family members. They were parts of these organizations. I was trapped in Amatolini. I'd say by that. So it's
Freedom.
Yeah.
Actually, in the case that
that I agree with.
so it was, self-governing.
I don't dispute that. Listen to that's not.
Because when I listen to they fought me and say, I'm on the ball. No longer Zulu. So if I was Zulu before, then I'm no longer Zulu. Because I don't even understand this thing. In culture was just,
No, for sure, very problem.
The one thing about it,
That force,
the one thing about the IFP, again, the 1980s become interesting. 1983, most people don't know about this, them Goye massacre. Do we understand what them Goye massacre was? Do you know about it?
I know that I actually got Mbowe massacre from that day. John Moshala, who explained he was there at Mbowe when it happened. Yeah, but plus the view and I know we have when I sit down. I just thought I to bloom to fair chances he wants to be last man on the ball.
I wanted to respond to yes. The AFP was always against us. I'm struggling there. Stairways, it was against. As a choir, it was for sure. Nengo, they killed, many of our students who came from here, Soweto, to the homelands who were called that they are bad influence.
For sure.
Yeah, I don't recognize this guy. Because they look themselves according to clans. That's why I say I don't belong to these factions, because if you're a Zulu, it means you must agree that Mrs. Zulu is your king, and I cannot take this. You don't know I'm intelligent enough. Even Zoliti, what is the struggle? Zoliti, during apartheid colonialism, nobody knows. He's never contributed anything. And I was surprised the other time was using a album lot when he was accused of xenophobia thing. He did not do that, during apartheid. Even during Phoenix, Masutu is what I meant years ago. Mrs. Zulu, we'd like to thank all the communities of Phoenix. After he finished, was I thank them. They say people died there, they're more than 200. They say, that's why sometimes the people who call themselves Zulus, they surprise, because they never rise against anything, against, the system of the day, beside black on black. Yeah, I might take saying they are very good. I wonder if the people who killed other people in Phoenix, where Basotho, they'll be fighting even to this day. But because it's another race. So that's where we find ourselves. But me now, all I can say, Uguti, South Africans, they were liberated by people internally, the people in the townships, the very same people who are excluded today. The people who are governing us are people who are in the Bantustan, people who are in exile, running away. They're in government today, people who contributed nothing. That's why you find today a guy who's never seen a train, until he was 40 years old, when he came to the big cities like Mbalula, he's made the Minister of Transport. He's never seen, a bus, because where he comes from, you must ride on a horse for 200 kilometers before you see a train. Make him a minister, doesn't understand what is a pothole. So all these guys, to me, they're nincompoops. We can see even the way they dress. They wear leopard ski, Lacoste from top to bottom. They can't even break it. So that's why most of them, they're always accused of sexual violence. I've asked them in one of their cookings, they kicked me out. I said, how do these guys always find themselves, Abo Pulema, because some we were told, good, they are twin pin, because they don't know it of Lala Sekas, Tinekas, if it's to them to other grade, they're to pay me. Uzan, if you put an I have no more do it no shop. La dupion. To get a command come to la dupion. So, man, that you am a lupion. Yeah, boy. So, one as you know who I am. That's what is that. Then I met Release a gonala. Also, the man out no credit la duria. So, these guys, South Africans should not be surprised when we are governed the way we are governed. And right now, these guys, Jacob Zuma, they're claiming they're liberating a black child. They are taking us from the Western imperialism to the Eastern imperialism. China is far worse, because these guys, they come with finished product, they come with labor, they just want to exploit us. There's nothing that they can do for us. Abo Kwazam Konto, they don't understand people who are going to Kwazam Konto. We must be for self-determination. Kandak was closer to that. You have our African PAC, however, our African currency, of which we are not. So we are here, we are because of these guys, they are traitors. And South Africans, this thing of voter, if voting gave you power, they would not have allowed you to vote. You vote, you place on puppet, and your puppet. The system is a problem. The CODESA system, the constitution of the day. No matter, even if you call Jesus to be the president, to change nothing, because he's indebted to the multinationals, to these globalist companies. So the only thing that can help it way, about one petty, must be escapers blue, red, yellow, one petty. Yeah.
Please do for us. You're the
Wow.
There's this one that I forgot to mention, bro. The economic fake fighters, the one who's managing the revolution.
All right.
And the youth, they believe in this guy. He's a notice of note. The King Jong-un of the minions. We need, to take the struggle on our own and lead ourselves. Yeah, that's that.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. There is much here that is unresolved. You know what I'm saying? There's much too much. We certainly need other brother, more structured sessions to follow upon this ones, to follow the lead, all the loose ends that came up from this conversation here. There's much here. I have to thank my fellow co-panelists and our sponsor here, Mashiane. Thank you.
Do you know Mugabe said that so meaning you called in I saw you was thinking it was she said she's a street woman. She said, don't tell me about that street woman. In was a lot. No, that's his opinion. She could do nothing about it. And I heard your interview. Edu wala sala fisa corner. La fisa thing wala sale. Pesa wana muyena wana kora shen. Anyway, let me say.